In tonight's program, we are delighted to host former Knesset member and previously the deputy mayor and member of the Jerusalem City Council, Rachel Azaria. Today, Rachel is dealing with renewal democracy. The initial plan for this evening was to discuss the different fractions in the Israel society. Due to the recent political development, we have changed our focus. So Rachel, what is happening today in the Israeli politics? Why do you think it's happening? Do you see this as a deadlock?
So hi, I'm happy to be here. Well, not so happy with the reasons we're here, but once, we're trying to make the best of what's happening. So let's talk a bit about Israeli politics. Israeli politics is a parliamentarian system which confuses people. It means that when we vote only with one ballot. And we vote for the party we are interested that in different ways. And then the different parties can form a coalition. What's been happening in Israel over the past, it's been going on for many years, but now for the past few years it's becoming even more so, is that there are two main camps, the right-wing camp and the left-wing camp, that are very much against each other, have a very hard time sitting together. In the past, there were times where it was this way, but there were also times where it wasn't the same way. And there's a lot of work against Benjamin Netanyahu, our prime minister, and the opposition was very much against him. And what happened was that we had series of elections, one after the other, where basically the opposition did everything they could take down Netanyahu. It looked like it was going to happen for many ways because it was a very, very even situation. But then came in the coronavirus. And the coronavirus basically changed the entire rules of the game. It's very hard to go back to elections again and again. I must say that till the coronavirus, it seemed as if we're just going to continue these elections forever. The last elections, everyone said, if you go out and vote, so now there'll be a decision, because it was like 58-62 or 59-61. It was very hard. The 60-60 was very hard to make a definition. But if you go and vote, that will change the situation. Well, that didn't happen. But if I said that at 62-58, it means that one side basically won, right? The side that got 62 should be able to form a government. But this brings in another part of Israeli politics, which makes it much, much harder. The Israeli Arabs, in Israeli politics, it is not traditional to lean on their voices to form a government. Once a government is formed, this is something that people do agree, that once a government is formed, they can be part of the coalition. But to lean on their votes, it gets complicated, because whenever you have to make any decision that has to do with military issues, they say from day one, we are not going to be able to support any decision to bomb the Gaza Strip, to arrest anyone from the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinians. This is something that they're not willing to do. So anything that has to do with security, people tend to say it is hard to form a coalition on their votes. And therefore, even though the Arabs and the left wing got 62 votes, it was very hard for them to form a coalition. So we're back and forth in this deadlock. And now when the coronavirus came in, suddenly everyone said, or many people said, this is not a time to continue this fight, and it's a time to form a joint coalition. So this is what's happening now in Israel. When Yaniv talked to me last week, I built a series of the three webinars that I'm supposed to pass this week, next week, the following week, and they were all supposed to be on the different tensions within Israeli society. And this morning, Yaniv told me, you can't really ignore what's going on in Israeli politics, because here they're going to form a joint coalition, and after three elections, this is the right thing to deal with. But since we talked in the morning till now in the evening, suddenly Benjamin Netanyahu, our prime minister, is probably he's going to be isolated, do you say, because of the coronavirus, that maybe he got maybe he caught the virus. So all of the decisions and all of the negotiations might be now postponed for a week. It's hard to know. So even though we woke up in the morning thinking that we're going to have a joint coalition, Now it seems like it's going to be, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. So maybe next week I can update you a bit more on this issue, but this is where we're standing right now.
Thank you, Rachel. If we think about this joint coalition and this is the road it's going, firstly, do you think that the quarantine of Benjamin Netanyahu will definitely be a delay in the forming of the government? And if so, and if it's a weird coalition, how do you see it actually working together?
So I think it will be complicated. We can see it already in the way this coalition is being formed. Because that it is a complicated coalition, one of the things is that they're giving the government in Israel, because of the parliamentarian system, the government has the ministers, and then you have the members of the Knesset. And they want to make sure that in the government there is half for the blue and white, the Gantz's party that joined in this joint coalition, and half for the right-wing parties, which is also the Likud and also the other parties that are coming with the Likud, all the right-wing parties and the ultra-orthodox parties. So because they want to be half-half, what they're doing is that they're enlarging the number of ministers from what used to be 18 or 20 or 22 or 24. Now it might be 36. And this means that the government is going to be a very heavy government, very challenging government. And the reason they're doing it is because that they know that otherwise it would be very hard to make sure everyone will be satisfied, and that, you know, there won't be any, there would be tensions, but still people won't tear apart the coalition so quickly. There are deep reasons for this complication. You know, on the one hand, we can always make fun of politicians and say, you know, just get your act together and stop fighting over your egos and come and tell us, you know, what's going on. But there are deep reasons. And the reasons are, I think Israel in many ways is going through kind of a cultural civil war. We are defining what does it mean a Jewish democratic state. And this is a huge challenge. We are very different groups of people. We came back after 2,000 years, Jews from all over the world. We have ultra-Orthodox Jews, we have very secular Jews, we have traditional Jews, we have right-wing, left-wing, and they're religious. I said ultra-Orthodox. There are people that came from North Africa, people that came from Europe and from the United States and from different places around the world, and we have 20% Arab citizens in Israel. So when you take all of these groups and you try to define what is our ethos, what does it mean to be in a Jewish democratic state? How do we make this work? How do we see our future? I think this is what a lot of what we're discussing now. After we handle a lot of the other issues, you know, security-wise, we're okay. Our economy is okay. A lot of issues that former generations had to deal with. Now we're, you know, things are much better. But this is the big challenge we're facing. When you look at I don't know how many Americans are in the crowd. If you're American, you can wave. But when you think of American history, in many ways, it's a little similar. When you think of the Civil War, 80-something years after the United States was born, or 70-something years, it's very similar. Again, trying to define what does it mean. What is the United States? What is the United States democracy? What does it mean? What is the Israeli democracy? What does it mean? And we see that a lot of the discussions are on these issues. What's the status of the Supreme Court? How does the government work with the coalition or with the Knesset, with our parliament? These are issues that we're discussing. How much power will the ultra-Orthodox have? And now with coronavirus, we see a lot of these challenges when the ultra-Orthodox took them a long time to understand that the rules are also, you know, they're also required to follow the rules. And we could see how this gap between the groups in Israeli society, how strong it is. So this is a big discussion. What does it mean, a Jewish democratic state, and how do we make this work together? So I think that these are the deeper reasons for this challenge. But then because we're a small country and because we have also, you know, real other challenges like we saw in the coronavirus, those are the moments where everyone goes together and tries to make it work out. But we still have these challenges that are waiting around the corner, right, you know, when the coronavirus, once we get over this challenge.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question, but also to open the floor. If any of you have a question, please use the chat to write your question, and Rachel will be happy to respond it. I wanted to refer, you said something, you said about the cultural war. And he said then that the Haredim are eventually also understanding that the coronavirus, the situation. On the other hand, again, I'm reading the news like I would assume most of us does, and we saw yesterday, or we heard yesterday, about a huge funeral in Bnei Brak, over 400 crowded people in the same place. How do you think you can actually gap those differences when we have the health minister who says, and I'm not quoting exactly, but it would be okay, and we can overcome it using faith? How do you see those gaps actually closing and moving forward as one joint government?
So I don't see it happening easily. I think that we're going to go through probably a decade of these challenges. When you think of the decades since the state of Israel was born, so you see that every decade, every generation had a huge challenge, and they always overcome it. So if we go quickly through Israeli history, we can see it. The 40s and the 50s, that was the generation of the pioneers, right? They established the state of Israel against all odds. No one thought they could do it. The United States was against. Everyone, said, take time, we're not ready yet. Then no one thought that anyone, would then be able to handle the War of Independence. But that generation got the job done. The next generation was the warriors, the 6-Day War, Yom Kippur War. The 6-Day War, looking back, seems okay, but just before, everyone thought that the state of Israel was over, that it was a story of 19 years and that's it. Everywhere throughout the country, there were digging burial areas. It was very, very threatening, and also, of course, the Yom Kippur War, one of the biggest, traumas of Israeli society. They handled it. And then when you go on, you can see the 80s and the 90s, those were the economic generation. That was when we moved from selling oranges to the high-tech, the startup nation that we have today. So that was a major issue in that generation. When you look on 2000, 2010, when you think of 2011, when there were the big demonstrations marching down the street, demanding social justice, I think those were the years when people said, okay, so we have our economy strong, but how do we make sure that Israelis actually enjoy this economy, the strength of the economy? So I think that was the 80s and 90s was the macro, and this is like the micro. And when you look at the pyramid of needs of Maslow, if anyone knows a little bit of psychology, I think this is very similar, because after you have everything else organized, that's the moment where you start wondering who you are and what you stand for. And I think, again, we have a huge challenge awaiting us. I can't really answer how we're going to overcome this challenge with the ultra-Orthodox. No one really knows how to do it. If anyone knew how to do it, we would march that path. This is, when you said I'm working on democratic renewal, the reason I'm doing it is because I realize that Israeli democracy is facing a huge challenge. And I think that what we need to do, the way I'm a former deputy mayor of Jerusalem, when I was deputy mayor of Jerusalem, what I did with the ultra-Orthodox is, first of all, I marked very clear boundaries. I think the problem with the ultra-Orthodox is that we never mark clear boundaries. We often kind of say, oh, okay, you're not exactly going by the book, but it would be okay. But when time goes by, we realize that it's not okay. So the way I did it, every time I was responsible for education, I would say, these are the boundaries. This is how we do things. If you want to negotiate something, we can negotiate. But in Israel, people don't like these kind of discussions. Usually, you kind of first ignore what's happening, and then you have to deal with it. I think that's what happened with the coronavirus. It's hard to tell how we will redesign this relationship. I do think this could be a time where we are redefining this relationship with the ultra-Orthodox. I think that people in Israel are going to be much less tolerant to these kind of behaviors in the future, because at this point, we don't have clear numbers, but it seems as if 50% of the people that are sick with the coronavirus are ultra-Orthodox, when they're actually between 10 to 12% of Israeli population. So it means that, we're at home for weeks already, and they didn't follow the rules, and we can see the difference. So It's hard to tell how we will redefine this, but I do think that we will have to. And I also think the way it will be is that there will be more strength to the center of Israeli society. Israeli society would be less and less tolerant towards smaller groups that are trying to gain power through the political strength they have.
But do you think that the political system in Israel, the way it's built by forming coalitions of small groups, are actually enable us in making those clear boundaries? Because today in the political system, you actually need those small parties to make a coalition to get the 61 seats. So does it go, can you make boundaries, but also in a place where you actually need them?
So I think the future will be in some kind of joint government. I think that the difference between, you see, there are small radical groups on every side that are trying to polarize our system. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of strength in the center that is very silent. But silent groups, you know, the silent majority is silent as long as everything is kind of okay. When something stops being okay, the silent majority suddenly has a lot of power. And what could happen, this is hard to tell, but also what happened with ultra-Orthodox now, and also not specifically the ultra-Orthodox, but just the fact that all of us are going to, once coronavirus will be over, almost all of us, you know, will probably, or many, I don't know, we're talking about close to 1 million people in Israel that lost their jobs over the past 2 weeks. So if this is going to continue, this could be a moment where the silent majority kind of, you know, awakens and tells all these small groups, you know, game over. The extreme right wing, the extreme left wing, the ultra-Orthodox, you know, radical groups from different sides and edges of Israeli society, they'll kind of say game over, you know, now we need to take care of ourselves. And it could be that what we're seeing now is the kind of the days after the Yom Kippur War. I'm not sure how familiar people are with Israeli history, so I'll give a couple of, you know, a few short sentences. The Yom Kippur War, except for being a horrible war that we lost more than 2,000 soldiers, was like almost a generation was erased. So except for that, it was two things happened. One is that people lost faith in the leaders. It was Mapai. They were very strong at the time. That was the party that founded the State of Israel. And since they found the State of Israel, till the Yom Kippur War, they were very, very strong. And the second thing that happened was that there was a recession, an economic recession after the Yom Kippur War, and both of them together, that's what, you know, changed the leadership, and from, you know, Ben Gurion and his party, the founders of the State of Israel, it turned into Begin, Menachem Begin. I don't have a photo of his, even though I like him very much. I should make sure I do. And he became the leader of Israel, and since then, on and off, there was Rabin on the way, but, you know, the right wing gained a lot of power in those years. And maybe what could be happening here is that I hope it won't be a big trauma, but if it will be a big trauma, so we could see these kind of changes in Israeli society.
Thank you. We have a question from Ariela. Do you think working with religious, even Dati Leumi individuals who want to be part of the conversation can help bridge the gap with the ultra-Orthodox? This can help with communalities. Has there been a major differences between the younger and the older generations in the ultra-Orthodox communities?
So I'm actually Dati Leumi. I'm modern Orthodox. So I think the sad part of our relationship with the ultra-Orthodox is that, at least in Jerusalem, for many years, we were very very positive, we were full of hope that things are changing. I had found the first ultra-Orthodox school where the students study for matriculation exams. In Israel, the school system is divided to 4 different school systems. Our our public schools are organized in 4 different school systems. You have the Arab public Israeli school system, which they study Arabic and Hebrew and you know, Arab history, Israeli history. That's one school system. The second school system is the regular secular school system. Then you have, which, you know, most students study there. Then you have the Orthodox, the modern Orthodox, or regular Orthodox. That's where my kids go to, which you study some Torah, you know, some Mishnah, some that, but you study all the regular school system, just with a bit of extra. And you have the ultra-Orthodox, that they don't study what the others study. They don't study math, they don't study English. So there was this attempt to establish a school where they will study all of these, you know, just regular school system. And those were years of a lot of hope. But unfortunately, we see that even if the youngsters are kind of, you know, more curious about the rest of the world, once they get older or they marry and have children, they all want their children to continue and study Torah, you know, not to go out and work. The ultra-Orthodox in Israel, they don't need to work. Basically, the government funds them for studying Jewish studies. So, I mean, I really hope that you know, that these things would change. Unfortunately, I think we were more optimistic than realistic.
We have another question from Yoel Cohen. In crisis, the environment is sometimes sacrificed for economic growth. After this temporary situation passes and the economy is given extra fuel, how will we protect Israel's fragile natural environment? As I mentioned, a lot of people lost their jobs. Israel is the world is going through tough times.
Yeah. I think actually that these are times that I was an environmental activist for many years, and I'm still part of the environmental movement. So actually, this is a very interesting question, because when this morning I was in a meeting, a Zoom meeting on these issues. I think that these times give us an opportunity to see how the world needs to behave for, I don't know, a few years to really save the world from the climate crisis. And I hope, you know, this is not the way we wanted it to happen, but the fact that there are no flights, no one's leaving the house, there are no one's using the car, where really we lowered all of our energy use, all of, you know, everything basically. We really cut down. And I think what I hope will happen is that we'll learn from these times, and I'm going to work towards this, so it will happen that it's an opportunity to learn how to do a lot of work without traveling far away. Even this kind of meeting that we're having now. I mean, usually probably, you know, I don't know, organizations would bring me into the United States. I would give a tour, give a speech, come back to Israel, and think how much energy would be wasted. And basically, this kind of teaches us that we can work differently. And I assume that universities will start working differently, and high-tech companies will work differently. And I'm sure that a lot of organizations will work differently. And it will take us also a while until we'll be able to fly again. People say that probably towards, you know, the end of the summer. We don't know if till then things will be over. So I actually think that this could be a positive change in the way we see the relationship with the environment. So I think that Israel, you know, we could be in a better place, because one of the major environmental issues we have is that we have horrible traffic jams. We're one of the most dense countries. We have a very high percentage of children per woman. It's not percentage, number of children per woman. In Israel, the average is 3.2. In the OECD, the countries, the other countries, United States, Europe, it's 1.7. So our growth is very big. We're still a country that, you know, we welcome Olim Chadashim. We're always happy when people make Aliyah. And also the lifespan is very long in Israel. I mean, they're all very good reasons. What's happening is that we're becoming a very, very dense country. So actually, this is giving us an opportunity to make sure to have less traffic on the streets, to rethink of how we're going to design the country. And I did a lot of that work when I was in the parliament. I chaired a committee that was working on how Israel would be in 2048, a year after Israel would be established. We will be the most dense country in the world, most crowded country in the world, and working on these ideas. So, you know, I do think this could be an opportunity to really redesign a lot of the way we think of things. So it's actually, in a sense, it could something positive could come out of this challenge.
I'm sure something positive does come. I also get all the, you know, it's very popular now on WhatsApp to say we're coming back to being more with our families and the traffic, less traffic jams. And the question is, do you think it will last? Because I feel that people have short memory. You know, we work we spend much more time at home now, but as soon as everything will be over, people will start flying again, and we'll have to catch up with a lot of things they've missed. So all the work balance, all the work-life balance that we're now reworking again, will again be, actually, I'm afraid it will be more devastating.
I don't know, I think, you know, I don't know, did you ever imagine we'd have this kind of webinar? I mean, did you do that very often?
No, actually, you know, funny enough, a friend sent me today a poster of a shop selling masks, you know, the Corona mask, and actually having a models. And he says, who would have thought that you actually will have models that are gaining money from modeling masks? So this is crazy times.
Yeah, so when you think of it, we're being introduced to new ways of doing things. And I'm sure, I know, going to Tel Aviv for a meeting and coming back, I think people will say, you know, I'm not willing to, you know, drive for an hour and a half every direction just for a meeting. Let's see if we can do a Zoom meeting. I think this is something that's being introduced everywhere. I mean, all the grandparents are having Zoom meetings with their grandchildren. I mean, who thought that would happen? Or the Leila Seder, everyone is talking about the Zoom. There are even rabbis that permitted in certain situations to have a Zoom-led, you know, Seder. So I do think, I mean, and I hope, and I think this is something that the environmental movement in Israel needs to work to make happen, and I think that it could happen, definitely.
Thank you. Yes, it gives you a different way of viewing things.
Perspective, yeah.
Someone said today it's actually the first time you distance from people because you love them and you don't try to hug them.
That's true.
It's a different perspective. We have another question from Ro'i. You mentioned the cultural wars between sectors in Israel. Many right-wing activists claim that the division of society into tribes misses the reality of growing integration of ultra-Orthodox and Arabs into the mainstream labor market and academy. What is your response to this process, and how do you think they will affect the cultural war you mentioned?
So I think it's very interesting because in our everyday life, we don't have a cultural war. Our everyday life, if you think of the doctors that are now, you know, working in the hospitals, you can have doctors and nurses, you know, from any different tribe of Israeli society, and they all work together, and it's very clear that they're there to save lives, and, you know, everyone knows what they're doing. So, and in everyday life, we don't see that. You can have, in universities, you can have a lot of people working together in high-tech companies, in banks, and everywhere. Everyone is working together in so many ways. I can tell you in Jerusalem, we have Eastern Jerusalem, Western Jerusalem. Eastern Jerusalem is the Arab area of Jerusalem. And we, you know, going to shopping malls, everything we do, I mean, when we used to do, everything we do was always, you know, in a very joint and a very hybrid or pluralistic environment. But once we start discussing our identity, it's like you light a match, you know, in a barrel of how do you say, of
gunpowder?
Of what?
Gunpowder?
Yeah, exactly, gunpowder. It's like within seconds, everything sparks. And everyone is, you know, everyone knows exactly what side to take and exactly what they think. And it's so, you know, they can't give up, and it's so clear. So I think that the fact that there are these changes, I'm not sure that we see it yet in this identity discussion. You know, what does it mean? What's the ethos of Israeli society? So I agree that there are these major changes. I'm not sure we see them yet in Israeli society. I can say, would you let me give a short story, Yaniv?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So 10 years ago, I was campaigning in Jerusalem to, you know, running for city council 11 years ago. And, you know, everyone had their poster on the bus. And also I wanted my poster on the bus, like, you know, everyone in Jerusalem. And I finalized everything. You know, it was part of advertising, you know, the list for city council, finalized everything with the bus company, the date, the month, everything. And the, you know, the price. Just before I got off the phone, he said, I just want to make sure you know that there are no women on buses in Jerusalem. I couldn't believe it. We were, you know, we wondered what to do. I'm giving it very short. I see someone already writing it.
The bus lawsuit is very famous.
It's famous, yeah. I went back and forth to the Supreme Court. I'll give it in short. But what happened was that, you know, we decided not to give up. We went to the Supreme Court. And in the discussion in the Supreme Court, the bus company told us, you know, the ultra-orthodox against posters of women on buses, and if we have the posters in the buses, so they tear them down and burn down the buses, so we can't allow that. So, you know, the Supreme Court told them, you can't do that, you have to have their posters. If you have men's posters, you have to have also women's posters. I won't give you the entire story because I went back and forth to the Supreme Court many times. But 4 years later, did we realize that it's not the ultra-Orthodox that tear off the posters. It's a very small group within the ultra-Orthodox. And this is something that is very important to remember. When we talk about these changes, are things changing? What happens is that when society is organized in small groups, within the group, the strongest group is the most radical one, i.e., within the ultra-Orthodox, the radical ultra-Orthodox have a lot of power over the rest of the ultra-Orthodox. And when Israeli society is segregated and every group lives separately, that's when these small groups or more radical groups within the ultra-Orthodox, between the right wing, between the left wing, within the, you know, every one of the groups of Israeli society, they gain much more power because they always challenge the, you know, the more moderate party members of the group. You know, you're not real ultra-Orthodox. Oh, you're not real right-wing if you don't say ABC. And they polarize and they pull you towards more radical views. And at the end of the day, when we won on the issue of segregation and disappearance of women from public sphere, only after we won did the ultra-Orthodox women actually join in, you know, into this battle, and they said we're not interested in this kind of you know, no women on posters, women have to sit back to the bus, of these kind of issues that we really changed when we went back and forth to the Supreme Court. So I think that when we have any of these kind of discussions, we need to remember that once the majority will gain more power, and I think it could happen hopefully in good terms, or after a huge crisis, which we could see in these days, when the majority gains more power, that's when the you know, the small radical groups within the other groups, they'll gain less power. So if we wonder if we see the difference within Israeli society, I think this is going to be a major, you know, situation where we're going to, you know, once the majority gains the power, hopefully we will see something changing. So I do think that there is what to await. I hope it won't be through a crisis.
It's an amazing story, and the question regarding this matter as a religious woman, how do you see the future of religious women in Israel politics?
So, okay, so the question, okay, thank you, Adi. We, religious women, religious Orthodox feminists, we've been for the past few years, and I'm one of, you know, one of the leaders even of this group, we've been for the past few years in the forefront of all of these issues of state and religion. Because whenever anything becomes more radical, we're the first to pay the price. Whenever the ultra-Orthodox gained more power, we were the first to pay the price. And what happened was that through some Facebook groups, actually, we gained a lot of power, and we learned, we learned to work together, and we campaigned against, over the past less than a decade, against segregation, separation of women from public sphere, for our rights when we go to the mikveh, to the ritual baths, over our rights, going against rabbis that were sexually abusing or harassing. Many campaigns have been held by Orthodox feminists, and this really, I think, in a way changed. I think that we could be a group that is changing Israeli society, because as I said at the beginning, a lot of the gaps between right-wing and left-wing in Israel is about the relationship with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has always been with us, the Orthodox feminists, always. I went back and forth to the Supreme Court, always winning, they always gave me the power, gave us the power to do, what we asked for, what we believed in. And when the gap is allowed with the relationship with the Supreme Court, most Orthodox women are usually in the right wing. But when it comes to the discussion about the Supreme Court, suddenly we're more part of the left wing. So it could be that this would be a way that this would change, that would become, the way, the gap, the very clear polarization in Israeli society, or the rift between Israeli society, suddenly we're a group that challenges it in many ways.
Amazing. And last question from Adir in Toronto. Kulanu was a moderating or centering factor in the previous government, calling itself the same right-wing choice. Now that Kulanu has been fully observed by Likud, do you believe that Gantz action will be able to successfully fill this role? And the second question, also from Adir, what lessons have you learned while being in the government in terms of protecting the integrity of the Supreme Court and continuing the economic cooperation with the Palestinian Authority?
Okay, so first of all, it's very interesting. Who asked about the Kulanu? I'm trying to see the name.
It's the same. It's Adir from Toronto.
Adir. Okay, so Adir, pretty amazing, actually. For the past few days, I was thinking that actually Gantz is going to be kind of the Kulanu of the former coalition. On the one hand, it's a larger party, so like they're supposed to have more strength than the Kulanu party, but on the other hand, they're almost all of them are coming with no political experience, and our party also had, the head of our party had a lot of political experience, and also, we had quite a bit of political experience, and the way he negotiated with Netanyahu was with, with much more knowing Netanyahu's strengths and weaknesses. And I think they're going to end up finding themselves in the same kind of situation, basically protecting the Supreme Court, struggling all the time. It's going to be hard for them. I was there. Those were very hard years. It was, I was in the coalition, but trying to protect what I believed in. On the one hand, I managed to pass a lot of legislations that have to do with their early childhood and working parents, which were issues that I'm very enthusiastic about, even though now they're less pressing because a lot of the issues were solved. But I also found myself a lot working against members of the coalition on issues that, state and religion, or the relationship with the Supreme Court, or different legislations to try to narrow down the power of the Attorney General. So I think the Gantz's party is going to be in a very similar situation, and it's interesting. Sorry, it's interesting that Adil from Toronto could notice that. What?
Labriut.
Toda. So yeah, I totally agree with the way you see it. What lessons have I learned while being in government in terms of protecting? What have I learned? A lot. One is that a lot of legislators don't read the legislations they vote on. I'm saying it. And sometimes it's not the end of the world, because, someone brings in legislation, if it's, how many vacation days, that was something I worked on, or, what kind of food would be served in the kindergartens, that was something I worked on. So, you read, you don't read, you get the essence of it, but when you have these major issues that really change the relationship between the government and the Supreme Court, you have to go over every letter. It's very, very important. And I could see that often I could convince other members of the coalition by telling them what actually is written in the bill. So that's one thing I learned. I don't know if that was that's what you expected my answer. But I think that we are, the Supreme Court has very bad PR. I think people don't know what's happening there. I think that there are groups within Israeli society that are really trying to change and weaken the status of the Supreme Court. I think that we are going to pay a very high price for it. I can tell you that I don't always like what the decisions of the verdicts of the Supreme Court. They protected me, but once, twice, three times their verdicts were horrible. Also, when I was in environmental organizations, the verdicts were very bad for us, and we learned not to go to the Supreme Court. Also, on issues that have to do with state and religion, like the kashrut program, the alternative kashrut program was working on that I can talk about maybe next time. So Supreme Court was against, and it's not that I always got what I wanted from the Supreme Court, but it's very important to know that if something is way against your basic rights, you can go to the Supreme Court, and by changing that, that is a big price to pay. I think that when you're in the coalition, when you're part of the majority, when you're part of the government, you can't imagine a moment that someone else, that your rights will be, that you will have to go to the Supreme Court for your rights. These were a lot of discussions I had with the former Minister of Justice, Ayelet Shaked, and I told her, you are a secular woman in Tel Aviv. I'm an Orthodox woman in Jerusalem. Chances are that I'll need the Supreme Court more than you will need it, because you live in a liberal area. It's very hard for you to imagine that you won't have what you need, and you'll have to go to fight for your rights. Your rights are very obvious to you. So I think that it is, when you're in part of the majority, it's very hard for you to imagine that you'd have to use the Supreme Court. But this is something that Menachem Begin always said. You have to remember that you're not always going to be in the coalition. You will be also in that position, so you always have to protect the rights of the minority, because you never know, even just because you never know when you're going to be part of the minority. So I think that many members of the majority in the Knesset, they don't remember that.
I think it's a very powerful sentence to finish with, that you can never know where you will be in the future. So Rachel, I would like to thank you for being with us and for sharing with us some insights and your understanding of the situation.